Porsche 959 looked like an ordinary 911 that someone had sent into the future, run through a NASA laboratory, entered in Dakar, Le Mans, and only then allowed onto the street. In the mid-80s, supercars were usually brutal, loud, difficult, and spectacular, but rarely truly intelligent. Ferrari 288 GTO was wild and beautiful. Lamborghini Countach looked like a poster from a child's bedroom, and Porsche did something completely different. It built a car that was not only fast, but could think together with the driver. It had electronically controlled all-wheel drive, sequential turbocharging, adjustable suspension, tire pressure monitoring, a composite body, and performance figures that in their time sounded like fantasy. It accelerated to 100 kilometers per hour in about 3.7 seconds and could exceed 310 kilometers per hour. It was the first Porsche that truly entered the world of supercars, not as an answer to Ferrari, but as a technological earthquake. 959 was not just a car. It was a manifesto by the engineers from Zuffenhausen, who wanted to show what the future of fast cars could look like. The history of the Porsche 959 began in the era of Group B, one of the craziest chapters in the history of motorsport. In the early 80s, the FIA created regulations that allowed manufacturers to build extreme rally cars with a relatively low homologation requirement. It was enough to prepare 200 civilian examples for a car to be entered in competition. This opened the door to a world of monsters with enormous power, lightweight bodies, and technology that often ran ahead of common sense. Audi showed how great an advantage all-wheel drive could offer. Lancia was building increasingly specialized machines, and Porsche did not want to remain on the sidelines. Initially, various directions were considered, even the use of the 928 model. But eventually, the company returned to its most important icon, the 911. It was precisely its rear-mounted engine layout, characteristic silhouette, and sporting pedigree that became the starting point. But 959 was not meant to be a simple evolution of the 911. It was meant to be a laboratory of the future. The first prototype was shown in 1983 under the name Gruppe B. Already then, it was clear that Porsche wasn't creating another version of the 911, but something far more advanced. The body revealed a kinship with classic Porsche, but it was much wider, smoother, and more aerodynamic. In 1985 in Frankfurt, a version close to production was shown, yet the road from motor show sensation to customer car turned out to be very difficult. The biggest problem was the complicated all-wheel drive system and the advanced suspension. Porsche did not want to release an underdeveloped car, and the scale of innovation was enormous. That is why the first examples reached customers only in 1987. Delays, costs, and technical problems made the project financially painful, but from the point of view of automotive history, it proved priceless. 959 was a car created to meet the demands of sport, but at the same time, it showed what supercars of the following decades would look like. Structurally, the Porsche 959 was an extraordinary mixture of tradition and revolution. On the one hand, it still had the engine mounted behind the rear axle, and its silhouette clearly referred to the 911. On the other hand, almost everything under the skin was new or taken to the extreme. The main structure used steel, but many body elements were made of aluminum, Kevlar, fiberglass, and reinforced plastics. The aim was to reduce weight, while also achieving very good aerodynamics. The drag coefficient was about 0.31 or 0.32, which was an excellent result for a wide supercar from the 80s. The underbody was smoothed, the rear received an integrated spoiler, and the widened fenders and sills were not merely decorative. They were meant to house the technology, improve stability, and give the car the right function. Some said that the 959 looked like an inflated 911, but that was precisely where its charm lay. It was not an Italian spectacle of form. It was a German answer to the question of how to wrap a technological bomb in a familiar Porsche shape. The heart of the 959 was a 6-cylinder boxer engine with a displacement of about 2.85 liters, derived from Porsche's experience in endurance racing, especially from the 956 and 962 models. It was not an ordinary engine from the road-going 911. It had 4 valves per cylinder, an advanced injection system, and an unusual cooling solution. The cylinders remained air-cooled, but the heads were liquid-cooled. For Porsche, this was an exotic solution, but necessary under such high thermal loads. The greatest sensation, however, was sequential turbocharging. 2 turbochargers were used in such a way as to reduce turbo lag and provide power across a wide rev range. The smaller turbo helped at lower revs, while the larger one came in later, when the engine needed greater airflow. Thanks to this, Porsche achieved around 450 horsepower and 500 Newton-meters of torque in the comfort version. In the mid-80s, these were absolutely cosmic figures for a road car. Power was transmitted through a 6-speed manual gearbox, but even that had an unusual character. In addition to the classic gears, there was a very short gear, marked with the letter G from the German Gelände, meaning off-road. It was a remnant of the car's rally ambitions and was meant to make starting in difficult conditions easier. The greatest revolution, however, was the PSK system, Porsche Steuerkupplung. It was an electronically controlled all-wheel drive system that could dynamically distribute torque between the axles. Under normal conditions, the greater part of the drive went to the rear, but the computer analyzed grip, wheel speeds, throttle position, G-forces, and the behavior of the car in order to change the proportions when necessary. During acceleration, the system could send even more torque to the rear axle, and on slippery surfaces, it helped stabilize the car. In the 80s, this sounded like technology from the future. Today, similar logic is obvious in many fast cars, but back then, the Porsche 959 set the standard that others still had to reach. The suspension was equally impressive. Porsche used a double wishbone system and 2 dampers at each wheel. One was responsible for damping adjustment, the other for changing ride height. The driver could choose different settings for ground clearance and stiffness, and the system could also adapt automatically to speed. At lower speeds, the car could have greater ground clearance, which suited its rally routes, but at high speed, it lowered itself to improve stability and aerodynamics. Added to this were special wheels with hollow spokes and a tire pressure monitoring system. Today, pressure sensors are commonplace, but in the mid-80s, this was an almost futuristic solution. Porsche created a car that not only had enormous power, but also systems that helped use it. That is what distinguished the 959 from many rivals. It was not a beast that had to be tamed only by strength and reflexes. It was a machine that gave the driver a technological advantage. The performance of the Porsche 959 was shocking in its time. The standard comfort version accelerated from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 3.7 seconds, depending on the source and measurement conditions. Top speed was around 314 to 317 kilometers per hour. The sport version was lighter, more raw, and even faster, and some data mention a top speed reaching about 339 kilometers per hour in the strongest specifications. In the mid-80s, exceeding 300 kilometers per hour in a production car was a magical barrier. The 959 not only crossed it, but did so with all-wheel drive, a luxurious interior, air conditioning, leather, and a level of comfort that most supercars did not offer. This was one of the reasons why comparisons with the Ferrari F40 are so fascinating. Ferrari was more raw, dramatic, and track-focused. Porsche was more intelligent, versatile, and technological. One was a scream of emotion, the other a display of engineering control. Porsche offered the 959 mainly in 2 variants, comfort and sport. Comfort was a luxury supercar, almost extraordinarily civilized by the standards of the era. It had leather upholstery, air conditioning, electric equipment, good audio, and an interior that felt more like a very fast Porsche for everyday driving than a raw homologation machine. Sport was a completely different proposition. Some of the comfort equipment was removed. The adjustable suspension was abandoned in favor of a simpler and stiffer setup, and weight dropped by about 100 kilograms. Some sources mention even more powerful sport versions, exceeding 500 horsepower. Sport was rarer, more uncompromising, and today is far more desirable among collectors. Only 29 examples of this variant were built, making it one of the most elite road-going Porsches in history. If comfort was the supercar of the future for a wealthy client, sport was its sharper, more collectible, and more performance-focused incarnation. Although the 959 was created with Group B in mind, its sporting career unfolded differently than originally planned. Rally Group B was cancelled after a series of tragic accidents before Porsche could fully use the project's potential in classic rallying. The brand, however, found another battlefield: the Paris-Dakar Rally. Earlier, in 1984, Porsche had entered the 953 model, a kind of testing ground for all-wheel drive, and won the Desert Marathon. In 1985, the first start of the proper 959 cars ended in failure, but Porsche returned a year later, better prepared. In 1986, 3 cars reached the Dakar finish line in first, second, and 6th place. It was a spectacular result. A supercar that was meant to be the fastest road car in the world also proved capable of completing one of the toughest off-road rallies in the world. Such versatility was something absolutely exceptional. The track-going Porsche 961 was also created on the basis of the 959. It was a racing version adapted for endurance competition, with power reaching around 680 horsepower and still with all-wheel drive. In 1986, the Porsche 961 started at Le Mans and finished the race in a very high position in the overall classification, winning its class. A year later, the car returned to Le Mans, but after technical problems and an accident, its career came to an end. Despite its short history, the 961 showed that the technology of the 959 had potential not only in the desert, but also on the track. It is a rare case of a car whose road, rally, and racing identities are so strongly connected. Porsche created a machine that could be a luxury supercar, a desert winner, and the basis for a Le Mans racing car. That is why the 959 is more than an expensive classic. Production of the Porsche 959 was small and complicated. It is most often stated that 292 production examples were built in the main series, and together with prototypes, pre-production cars, and later cars assembled from spare parts, the total number reached about 337, or slightly more, depending on the method of counting. Only 29 sport versions were made. In the 90s, Porsche built a few additional examples from remaining parts, all in the comfort version. Every car was extremely expensive to produce. Despite the high selling price, Porsche lost enormous amounts of money on each example. It is said that the cost of construction and development was so high that the company subsidized every car. Financially, the project wasn't a success. Technically, however, it was one of the most important experiments in the history of the brand. The 959 showed solutions that later returned in subsequent generations of Porsche, especially in all-wheel drive for the 911 Turbo and in active chassis systems. How much can the Porsche 959 be worth today? It depends on the version, condition, mileage, history, and originality. Ordinary comfort examples in very good condition often reach prices above $1.5 million today, and the best ones can exceed $2 million. In recent years, well-kept cars at prestigious auctions have sold for around $2 million, and exceptional examples for even more. The sport version is on a completely different level. Because production was limited to 29 units, and because of its lower weight and more uncompromising character, its prices can reach several $1 million. The best sport examples reach levels above $5 million, and an exceptional history or minimal mileage can push the value even higher. Cars modified by Canepa, especially with packages raising power even to around 800 horsepower, create a separate market because they combine the original legend with restomod perfection. For purists, however, factory originality remains the most valuable. The 959 has long ceased to be just a classic Porsche. It has become an investment artifact of technological history. The Porsche 959 is an icon of motoring because it was ahead of its time more than most supercars of the 80s. It was not the prettiest, it was not the most theatrical, and it did not have Italian sensuality, but in terms of technology, it was almost unmatched. Sequential turbocharging, electronically controlled all-wheel drive, active suspension, composite body elements, tire pressure monitoring, and performance above 300 kilometers per hour made the competition look more analog and traditional next to it. It was a car that showed that the future of supercars would not be based solely on more and more power. It would be based on control, traction, aerodynamics, electronics, and intelligent use of performance. In this sense, the 959 was the ancestor of modern Porsche turbos, but also of many contemporary supercars with all-wheel drive. Today, its solutions no longer seem abstract, because the world has caught up with what Porsche showed 40 years ago. In the end, it is worth understanding that the Porsche 959 is not a legend only because it was fast and rare. It is a legend because it was a breakthrough car. It was created in an era when motorsport allowed engineers to dream very boldly, and at the same time, it arrived at the moment when electronics were beginning to change the way cars were driven. The 959 combined the mechanical character of classic Porsche with technology that announced the future. It won Dakar, showed potential at Le Mans, was the fastest production car of its time, and became a benchmark for the entire industry. Even Nissan reportedly analyzed its all-wheel drive system while working on its own traction systems, which shows how much respect this construction inspired. Porsche lost money on it, but gained something more important: proof that it could build the most advanced sports car in the world. That is why the 959 remains one of the greatest icons of 20th century motoring. It is not just a supercar from the 80s, it is the moment when the future arrived too early.